Welcome everybody. For some of you it's afternoon and for others it's evening. So thank you for coming. And I'm Jessica McCready. I'm host of these chats and a master's rower and scholar with the North Bay Rowing Club in Petaluma. For tonight's chat, we'll have Sage Roundtree, and she's going to focus on yoga for athletes. In this session is on how yoga can best complement your training and racing schedules. Before we get to Sage's presentation, if you'd like to just take a moment, if you haven't already, and just type in the chat where you're logging in from and who you're affiliated with, what club or what have you, just as a way for other people here tonight to see who's in this virtual boathouse, so to speak. While you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and just talk a little bit about the chats and where you can find details on the upcoming schedule and recordings of previous chats. The Petaluma Riverside Chats is a venue to enhance attendees' knowledge of all aspects of rowing, and as well as talks and presentations that raise our awareness of our beloved local Petaluma River watershed and the goings-on of the greater Petaluma River community. You'll find dates and times of the upcoming chats on the About page of the Petaluma Riverside Chats on the Chat YouTube channel, and video recordings there as well. And on this note, just a quick reminder, if you do not wish to be recorded, you can watch live with your video off. And if you'd like to get a Zoom link to these chats in the future, please do email me. And I posted my email and the Petaluma Riverside Chat YouTube channel link at the very top of the chat, Zoom chat. As our time tonight with Sage progresses, I welcome you to type your questions and comments into the chat, and we'll try to get to them in real time, as well as potentially following up in the Q&A. So I was introduced to Sage's work at the end of my Santa Rosa Junior College yoga teachers training by the person who was running that, Andrea, and I believe, I don't know if you know who, anyway. So she said,
Andrea Thomas.
Yes. Yeah. When I was training to run a half marathon, and I would come in after running in the morning to my yoga training and be like, oh, I'm so tight. And so I asked her if there was anybody that focused on yoga for athletes, and so she sent me along to Sage. And I've been doing Sage's teaching yoga to athletes teacher training for a while now, but it's wonderful, it's fantastic. So I encourage, if you're interested in that stuff, I encourage you to explore it further. It's an understatement to say Sage is a pioneer on yoga for athletes. She's an experienced registered yoga teacher at the ERYT 500 level and an endurance sports coach with certifications from USA Triathlon, USA Rowing, and the Roadrunners Club of America. She has authored 9 beautifully written books. The 3 I frequently reference to support my training and overall well-being is The Athlete's Guide to Yoga, The Athlete's Guide to Recovery, and The Athlete's Pocket Guide. She has many more, but I encourage you, to ask her questions about these resources and other things that she has going on that might interest you tonight. Covering topics from mindfulness and yoga to core strength, race planning, and recovery, Sage helps athletes and everyone find the right balance between work and rest for peak performance in sports and in life. Her students include casual athletes, Olympians, NBA and NFL players, the Charlotte Hornets team, and many University of North Carolina athletes and coaches. And this includes her work with the basketball, football, and the women's rowing team there. She co-owns the Carolina Yoga Company with locations in Carrboro, Durham, and Hillsborough, North Carolina, and is a faculty member at the Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health, a regular presenter at the Wanderlust Festival and Yoga Journal live circuits, and has taught in locations as varied as the Pentagon, Prospect Park, and full rooms at Yoga Works in New York City. And that's just to name a few of the venues that she's taught in. Please join me in a warm welcome to Sage Roundtree. In tonight's talk and activity, she'll cover yoga's benefits for strength, flexibility, and focus, how to include yoga to support a periodized training plan, and when to put yoga in the context of your year, season, week, and workout. And we'll learn a quick routine rowers and coaches are can customize as a dynamic warm-up to prep for rowing or as a cool down off the water. and then we'll wrap up with a Q&A. So welcome, Sage, and so glad you're here with us today.
Thanks, Jessica. The first thing I usually tell people when I'm leading any kind of session with them that's at all yoga related is that Sage Roundtree is my real name. It's not a yoga handle that I appropriated for myself. My parents were not quite hippies. They were bluegrass musicians, but they wanted a unique name. And that's how I got my first name. And I got my last name from my husband, who's Roundtree. It's Roundtree without a D, R-O-U-N-T-R-E-E. It's a variation on Rowan tree. Anyway, all that to say, I'm glad to be here. I am glad to talk to you. I am coming to you from Boone, North Carolina. It's not a riverside chat, but I did turn on the fire, so we've got a fireside chat. Like Jessica said, I want to talk for a little while, lead you through some slides, and then we'll get up and move. We'll repeat a routine to the point where I hope you will feel familiar with it, but it is in the slides as well. So if you want to come back and look at the recording, you'll have it all written out for you. I'm hoping that this is something you can do before you get out on the water yourself or lead your athletes through. I lead yoga teacher trainings, but the real secret is that anybody can teach yoga. And if you are a coach, you should feel like if you're comfortable leading people through movement, you don't need any special unique set of skills to lead your athletes through a yoga class, especially a 10-minute yoga class. Like, you'll feel empowered to teach, I hope, once we get to movement in a little bit. But here, let me share my screen, and I will walk you through a few slides so we get some context about how we can use yoga to complement a periodized training plan, what we might be looking for in a studio schedule, and more. So there we go. So that's me at my Carrboro location. Carrboro is a suburb of already small Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And there's where you can contact me, my website, and my social media handle. If you have questions for me, please reach out. You can message me, or info@sageroundtree.com will get to my email. When I think about the 50,000-foot overview of yoga for athletes, I like to ask the journalist questions of who, what, where, why, when, and how. And the what is fixed, it is yoga. And the who is obviously for athletes. And in your particular instance, it's for rowers. So with that dialed in, we can think, why would we want to include yoga as part of a rowing training plan? There are physical and mental reasons, strength, flexibility, and focus on both the physical and the mental plane are all really critical for athletes. And when you put them all together, you get a sense of balance. We'll break that down in a subsequent slide. We'll talk about where you can do yoga. If you're going to choose yoga from a studio schedule, it's useful to have some idea about what the words on the schedule mean, what you might be looking for as an athlete who's newer to yoga or as a more experienced athlete. But I want for your rowers to feel empowered to do yoga on their own. So yoga doesn't have to happen in a room with incense and candlelight and sticky mats and smelly bolsters and straps and lots of other people. It can absolutely happen on its own, just you and your breath and your body out on the dock before you get in the water. When we put yoga in the training plan, depends on how serious the athlete is, but the more serious the athlete is, the more serious the inverse proportionality of the intensity of the yoga asana practice. So the physical practice of yoga needs to be for the athlete. So we'll drill down on that a little bit. And we'll talk about how kind of the attitude that is critical for athletes as they come to yoga, because athletes have a very particular attitude of competition, and that is not a useful attitude for the most part to carry onto the yoga mat. So we'll talk about ways to manage that attitude in yoga. Good so far? Thumbs up? Okay, cool. So a little bit more about the why. As I said, yoga can help with full body strength. It is a body weight practice, so it's not going to be a substitute for a resistance training practice. But if you were leading your team or yourself through a strength practice that was 3 to 4 times a week, you might be able to add yoga as a place of one of those 3 to 4 times a week, but it's not really going to cut it in terms of developing the level of strength you need to compete at a high plane. So it's a complementary practice rather than a primary strength practice. That said, it's really holistic and it builds a graceful kind of strength, particularly if you practice the more flowing styles of yoga. When you think yoga, you probably think stretching, so flexibility, very critical for for fluidity out on the water for fluid stroke. Sometimes we use the word flexibility to encompass both flexibility in the muscles and range of motion in the joints, but yoga can also be really good in addressing the joints as well as the soft tissues that surround them. And yoga is also super fast track for developing a sense of focus. And sometimes I talk about focus and presence. Some kinds of athletes, like the endurance athletes, need to be super focused on one thing at a time, like the stroke, or for swimmers, the black line at the bottom of the pool, or for a cyclist in a time trial, their power output as they go and whether they can sustain it over the course of the entire time trial. Other athletes need to develop a sense of presence. If we were talking about yoga for basketball, for example, a basketball player needs to be aware of many things at once. How much time is left on the game clock, how much time is left on the shot clock, where the team's foul situation is, the position of other players, the set plays that are chosen for her. So that is more a sense of presence. And yoga can be really good at developing both of them. And for those of you who are yoga teachers, I think of focus and presence as dharana and dhyana, which are some of the latter limbs of yoga. We don't need to get too deep into that right now, but if that intrigues you, I definitely unpack that in my bigger trainings for teachers who want to work with athletes. When you get these skills of mental and physical strength, mental and physical flexibility, and that mental flexibility comes when the athlete has the attitude in the yoga class and realizes maybe my body is not going to do the same things that the teacher's body is, or my body is not going to do the same things that a gymnast's body is, because I have trained my body to be good at this particular skill of rowing. Then develop a mental flexibility that says, I don't need to compete. I just need to focus on where my strengths are, where my limiters are, and how I can improve my limiters. And when you have that together with the sense of focus and presence, then you're really cooking with gas and you have like a full body balance, and a body mind balance as well. I didn't put this in a bullet point, but it's so integral. I think that's why I forgot. Yoga is also really good at training athletes to have awareness of their breath and to deploy the right breath for any situation, whether that situation is simply warming up on the water or going at an all-out last stroke sprint. Yoga can be a laboratory on the mat for athletes to get to know the mechanism of their own breath and how it might change in different situations and how they might harness its power so that they can use the breath to support whatever it is that they want to do. So we'll imagine that there's a bullet point here under balance that says breath. I alluded previously to mental training, to the ability to sustain focus on one thing over time, or to have a kind of multi-planar meditative present awareness, mindfulness of many things happening at once. That was the example of the basketball player. Yoga is also really good at giving athletes a chance to observe their own patterns. In yoga, we use the word samskara to describe patterns. We all have these mental habits that we get into, and they really deploy in terms of your sport, your practice, your self-talk during practice and during competition. And if you can start to know what those patterns are, then you can decide whether they're working for you or whether you might want to reroute them into a more positive habit or pattern. That's where things like mantra can be super useful. So yoga can be a wonderful way to develop mental toughness and to do mental training. It can also help with like visualization and other things that will help athletes out on the water. Most importantly, I think, is that yoga gives athletes the chance in every practice that ends with shavasana, which is that final relaxation corpse pose you do at the end of practice. It gives you the chance to get comfortable with taking stillness and rest, which is where the efforts of your training actually are getting incorporated. So at the end of a session out on the water, or a session on the ergometer, or a session in the gym, you're more weak than you were when you started if you did your workout correctly. And it's during rest that the body repairs and recovers and rebounds stronger for the next session. So rest is super critical for athletic performance, but it typically gets shortchanged because it's a passive thing. It's not an active thing. It's about letting the rest happen and the body recharge instead of making it happen. And I know the athletes that I work with in land-based endurance sports have to endure a mental shift to get to the point where they really believe that less is often more, especially if they're flirting with an injury. It's often tempting to do more to make it happen. If I just can push a little bit harder, I'm going to break through this plateau or this downward trend that I feel I'm having. And in fact, often it's rest that improves the body and the mind. So yoga is an opportunity, especially in those final relaxations at the end of every class, and also in the downtime in the class itself, the break you take in child's pose or the hold you do in pigeon pose. These are all a chance for you to begin to value stillness and rest, which is a critical component of total performance for an athlete. Sometimes I describe it in terms of comfort with comfort and comfort with discomfort. Athletes have to be comfortable with being on the extreme edge of discomfort, but they also need to have more of a reserve. Like, you can't spend all your time here at the upper edge. Yoga gives you a chance to be down at the other edge and to grow comfortable with just being comfortable, to grow comfortable with not having to have full sensation at every level of your body at every point, like to just kind of chill and hang out and not be like, oh, wow, I really feel this all the time. It's such a critical, such a critical skill, not just for your athletic performance, but for your ability to function in society, to not be that full-on person all the time. And yoga is a really great laboratory for developing that comfort with comfort. Just to come a little bit deeper into this, because I wrote a whole book about it and I am an evangelist for resting. Sometimes I like to say I am the expert in not working out and what happens when you're not working out. You know, ultimately, just like you can't stay awake forever, you can't push with no rest forever. So it's way better for athletes to learn to take rest on their own terms. And yoga gives them a chance to do that. Best modes for rest, quick detour through the highlights of my book called The Athlete's Guide to Recovery, is time. So you can't just pile on more workouts without having sufficient time in between them. So that's a real letting things happen instead of doing things happen modality. Sleep, also super critical for rest. Good nutrition is very good for rest. And then things like stress reduction, reducing your amount of commitments in the work space, in the school space, saying no to asks for you to serve on committees, ordering takeout instead of having to do your own meal prep all the time. All of this is really good for reducing the overall level of stress in the body. And restorative yoga, which is like taking a nap on a pillow, it's delicious, wonderful, like the dessert form of yoga, is a really great way to slot in some rest. And during a restorative yoga class, you're also having an opportunity for mental training, for presence and focus, and for breath awareness. I have a book called The Athlete's Guide to Recovery that breaks this down. It also goes through all the more glamorous things that you could try to improve your recovery, like foam rolling and e-stim and special supplements. And I'll just spoil the book for you. Really, these are the most important things you can do for rest. So yoga can be part of your rest regimen. All right, here's my manifesto on how yoga can complement a serious athlete's training plan. First off, yoga for athletes is not athletic yoga. A lot of people come to yoga for athletic conditioning, like as their workout. Cool. As a studio owner, I depend on those people and I like to give them the sweaty classes that they're looking for. But when you're getting your sweat elsewhere, when you're trying to train yourself to a specific periodized peak for your A race, your main event, whether it's the Olympics or the conference championships, you've got to come at yoga from a very different physical approach. So we're looking for yoga that will complement training instead of being the training itself. So we're not using yoga as our sole means of strength. Instead, we talk to a strength and conditioning coach and think, how can I develop the right strength so I can have best power on the water? Our goal in yoga for athletes is to help the athletic body be in balance, to help the athletic mind be in balance, and yes, even maybe to help the athletic soul be in balance, so that we have a healthy sense of our body's abilities and a healthy approach to competition that that helps to support that complete athlete instead of just feeding the fire. And that's where the workout forms of yoga can be a pitfall for athletes, because if your athlete winds up in 105-degree flowing yoga class, they're going to have a familiar sensation like they have in their harbor workouts, like endorphins. Woo, this is so hard, but I can use all the skills that I developed out on the water to muscle through this class. Well, now we're just kind of digging a rut where we could have tried a different approach to yoga to help to shore up that habit with some other healthy habits. So we're looking for a whole athlete balance here. And over the course of a periodized training plan, the physical intensity of your yoga needs to be, hang on, guys, I gotta tell this computer not to restart in the middle of this. Don't do it. If it does, I will come back. Don't worry, classic Zoom fail. So I'll act like I said no, and we'll see what happens. The physical intensity of yoga in the training cycle needs to be an inverse proportion to the physical intensity of training. That is to say, when you are in the off season, then you can go to the 105-degree flowing class. But as you get closer and closer to your peak competition, the intensity of your physical yoga practice needs to dial back. And that's the long and short of it. I think I clipped out a slide that got really geeky on this, but you need to, oh no, there is one a little bit later. So we'll get to that. All right. Where do we do this yoga? If you're going to the yoga studio, I have a few suggestions. One is, I know as a studio owner that your schedule, your personal schedule as the student coming to class most often dictates the class that you wind up in, which isn't great, because that might mean that you wind up in the 105-degree flowing class because it's the one that happened to be at a time you could make it. So it's useful to be discerning and discriminating when you're choosing off of a studio menu. And your best resource there is to call the studio or write the studio or direct message the studio and ask them for help. Ask them, what would be the right class for me as a newer, tighter athlete coming to yoga? A basics class or something called like Yoga 101 is generally a pretty good place to start. Never wrong to start at the beginning with the basics. It's not the most glamorous, but it's setting you up for success over time. And generally those classes are not going to be too intense either. Now that everything happens online, there are even more online options than there ever were before for yoga. And you can choose, I'm sure, find some great yoga specifically for rowers and maybe even specifically for various points in your training cycle, whether you're in your base or your build or your peak or looking for something restorative or even looking for a visualization. I bet the internet has it to offer to you. I have some general classes for athletes at a website called yogavibes.com. And there's a code for you if you want to save 25% on them. But a good Google search is your friend. What's nice about doing yoga at home instead of in the studio is that if you realize it's too hard, you just click away. If you realize that it's too easy or the vibe just isn't right for you, you just click away and you haven't committed to kind of following through on an hour-long experience in person. If you're going to do yoga at home, you also have the ability to control every variable that is part of the athletic stimulus that you're putting on your body. These are frequency, intensity, and duration. And for those of you who are coaches, you're familiar with this. That's how you're tweaking your athletes' workouts. You're figuring out, how frequently do they need to have a stress stimulus specific to the sport over the course of the week or the month or the entire training cycle? How intense is that stimulus and how long does it last at any given point? When you're taking yoga in a group class, the instructor sets all of those other than intensity, and really an athlete who's competitive is going to make it the most intense possible anyway. But when you're doing yoga at home, you get to decide, especially if you're doing your own practice and not a led practice. How many repetitions do I want to do of this particular movement? How many breaths do I want to stay? What's my duration? And how far do I push, or how light do I keep it in terms of intensity? That's how you get best balance. That's how you tweak it for your own personal body or your athlete, your student's personal body. If you're doing yoga at home, you want to keep the movement before your workout dynamic. And then after your workout is when you can go for static holds. And that's what, when we come to movement in just a minute, we'll be exploring what does a dynamic version of this sequence I'll teach you look like, and what does a static version of it look like. I have another book to pitch to you. It's called Everyday Yoga, and it's kind of a recipe book for home practice. It's a spiral bound book, so it lays flat on your mat or your coffee table. And one side has pictures for your reference, and the other side has a few a few verbal instructions and ways that you can make things spicier or sweeter depending on your needs. So if you were in the base period or even in your off season, you could choose the spicy options. And if you were in a build period or close to competition, you can choose the sweeter options. All right, when? This is starting to get into that rule of inverse proportion I talked about. When in the season do you want to do yoga? You want your yoga to be more physically intense when you're in your off season in your base and less physically intense when you're coming up to your peak. When in the week do you want to do yoga? If you are a coach and a yoga teacher and you wanted to devise like a really beautiful training plan for an actual or a hypothetical student, you wouldn't want for every day to wind up just being a medium intensity day. You need your hard days to be hard and you want to keep your easy days easy. I hope that makes sense just intuitively to you, but what often happens is we think, oh, it's a rest day. I'll just send the athletes to yoga. They go to the yoga studio. They wind up in a class that's far more intense than what they actually needed on that day. And now that rest day has been jettisoned. It's no longer a rest day. It's a medium day. Or if I do a hard yoga session on a very light recovery workout day, again, that's not a light day anymore. It becomes a medium day. So we're trying to get ups and downs. We need peaks and troughs, waves over the course of a training week so that we don't have this monotony in the training cycle, which leads to staleness and to burnout and even to overtraining. When in the day would you do your yoga? Well, you do it when you can, but if it's before or after your workout, you'll tweak it accordingly. So if it's just before your workout, you want to keep it moving and dynamic to help to prepare your body for movement. And if it's after your workout, if you've got the energy, you can do more dynamic movement, especially for your core. But then if it's later in the day, you'll probably want to come into something that's more mellow and still and static. And that's just reiterating the point. All right, you all still with me here? Can I get a thumbs up from you, Jessica? You can hear me? Okay, cool. All right, we've got just another slide or two to get through. This is the one I couldn't remember if I had kept in or taken out. It's when in the season would you want to do your yoga? And this is just a slide for those of you who are coaching. You think about what the focus of the period is, and then you think, all right, how is yoga going to be a complement to this particular focus? So in the off season, in the preseason, during the base period, that's when you're working on aerobic base and strength and skills, and that's when the yoga can be more intense. So this is the yoga intensity that goes down over the course of the training cycle, and this is the training intensity that goes up. We've got the inverse proportionality. Then as you get more into the middle of the season, you're using yoga to maintain flexibility. Kind of it's like a maintenance modality. So the body can remain kind of pliant and flexible. And then when you get close to your peak, that's when yoga is focus itself. And it might be that you're doing restorative yoga or guided meditations or simple breath exercises. Everything is way more mellow. How do you do this yoga? Well, you do it in a way that supports your training. So one thing that you might want to do is to do it in a way where you set yourself an intention. We yoga teachers are big on intention, that when I get on the yoga mat, I'm just going to keep my eyes on my own mat. It's not going to be a competition. There's no finish line for me to get to. I'm going to let this be some me time and not some hypothetical athlete's time. It's just time to unwind. You kind of set this commitment to yourself that you're going to do less or let go. And those might make really good mantras for your intention. Do less, so that when you're faced with a decision point in the physical practice, do I want to ratchet this up or take it down? You remember, oh, my intention was do less, because that's the way that you'll probably ultimately support your training. Unless you came to yoga for a workout and you're in your off season or early on in the training cycle, and then your intention might be, I'm going to push a little bit more. And then all the familiar tools that we use in competition will work there. Y'all ready to move? Okay. All right. So let me show you what we're going to do on the slides, and then I'll get out of the screen share. And these slides then will have all these points in them. So I'm going to teach you what you can do. Don't need any special equipment at all. Don't even need a yoga mat. And if you're doing this as a dynamic warm up, you'll want to do at least your rounds with 3 repetitions of each movement. And the movements are designed to warm up your whole body. So have a standing side bend. That's going to be a lateral flexion of the spine and some work for the shoulder. We'll do that on both sides. Do a little bit of rowing movement because I had to. Do a little bit of complementary movement, the opposite direction, what we can call a double backstroke. And then eventually we'll bend the knees and lower down into everybody's favorite pose, chair pose, which is a light squat and kind of approximates what you're doing in the boat. Then we'll come to a chop, like a chopping, twisting movement, which is nice for working rotation. And then from there, we'll do some more arm stuff. Finally, I was thinking, how can I take this sequence and make it even more specific for the rowers? So we'll be alternating between a forward fold and a squat. In the forward fold, you'll be prepping your hamstrings for contraction, and you move out into a squat. The squat is working on your quads and your glutes and your calves as well. And that'll be our dynamic warm up. So I'll lead you through that and we'll repeat it. Then we'll come into how we can tweak that to make it more static. And if you're doing this out on the dock, once you get out of the boat, you could hold these for anywhere between like 5 breaths and 5 minutes or whatever feels good. Some of these are all standing, so 5 minutes would be a long time, but we'll revisit the side bend, but I'll show you some ways to make that stretch different areas in your torso. We'll revisit the chest stretch to undo the front of the body tightness that we gain on the water. We'll come back into a twist, and I'll show you a way, because we won't have been doing a step back in the beginning, a way to get into the front of the hip flexors, which is an area that will feel really nice to hit right out of the boat. And then we'll come back to the forward fold and the squat, which are both really useful, just general purpose stretches for athletes. Sound like a plan? All right. I'm going to stop my share. I'm so glad my computer did not restart on me. That was very stressful. Good thing I do yoga. And I'm going to step back over here so you can see me. Not the best lighting because the sun's gone down on me, but I'm going to give you words as well. So join me in standing. You just need the room to move your arms out to the sides. That's it. And while you are arriving, I'm going to kick my slippers off. You can shake things out in any way that feels good, and it might be just literally a shakeout. All right, so I'm going to talk you through this once. It's going to feel like it moves maybe medium fast the first time through, and then on the second set, you'll think, okay, yeah, I saw these movements before, and then on the third set, we'll be moving, I hope, even more fluidly. So we start with our feet where you would have them on the boat. So put a little bit of space. Get things feeling good there. Lower your shoulder blades down your back, but they're going to get to move up and down because this is a dynamic warm up. And as you come to a breath in, lift your arms up. I'll be your mirror. Catch your right wrist in your left hand and exhale, lean over to your left. Then inhale, come through center, switch the grip. Exhale, lean over to your right. Inhale, lift your arms up, and exhale, take them forward and row them in. And we'll reach forward and back. Forward and in, forward and in. Then let's reach forward, big arm circle. This is that double backstroke I talked about. We'll do 1, inhales, lift, 2, we'll do 1 more, inhale, lift. As you exhale, bend your knees some, come to a light chair pose. Inhale, reach your hands forward, take them together. Exhale, chop to your left. Inhale, reach forward. Exhale, chop to your right. Do that 2 times more. Inhales, lift things. Exhales, lower them. Inhale, lift. Exhale, lower. 1 more set. Inhale, lift. Exhale, lower. Keep it here. Take the back of your right hand to the outside of your left knee. Next breath in, lift your left arm up toward the ceiling. Exhale, clap your hands together. Inhale, lift, and exhale, lower. 1 more time. Inhale, lift. Exhale, lower. Inhale, lift through center. Exhale, chop to the other side. And again, we'll inhale, reach up, exhale, palms together. If your hips are like mine, like I'm already feeling my glutes are like, why are we holding chair pose so long? That would be normal. Inhale, lift, exhale, lower. Inhale, reach your hands forward, and exhale, dive down into a loose forward fold. Then inhale, bend your knees a lot, drop your hips, look forward. You can come as low into a squat as you like, but immediately depart, exhale, fold forward. We'll do a couple more of these. Your hands could stay on your legs. If you got really long arms or really long hamstrings, your hands could come down to the floor. They could come onto some kind of support. 1 more time, exhale, forward. Inhale, lift, and exhale, rise all the way up to standing and relax, shake things out. So we worked the spine in both lateral flexion directions. We worked it in twisting, and then we worked it forward and back. Those are the 6 moves of the spine. We also worked through the shoulders, side to side, front to back, and we came through the chest and the back when we did the twisting movement again. So let's do it again, and this time we'll do 3 side to sides, 3 of everything. Inhale, lift up, catch your right wrist. Exhale, lean to your left. Inhale, rise through center, switch the grip. Exhale, lean to your right. Inhale, lift. Exhales, lower. We're working obliques here. The obliques on one side are working and the obliques on the other side are releasing. Wonderful complementary movement that happens in many yoga things. Inhale, lift through center. Exhale, lean over. Inhale, arms up. Exhale, row in. Do 3 more of those. Inhale, reach forward. Exhale, roll back. In and out. Now we'll reverse. Inhale, arms up and forward. Exhale, sweep them back and down. Inhale, exhale. This third one will sit down into the light chair. Inhale, lift. Exhale, sit. Inhale, hands forward. Exhale, chop to your left. Inhale, exhale, chop to your right. Keep going. As you do, if you want to make this more of a twist for your spine, don't let your knees or your hips move at all. If you need to let your knees and hips move, you're kind of bumping your left leg straighter and then your right leg straighter. Now we'll hold. Inhale through center. Exhale, hold. Back of your hand or palm of your hand to your leg. Next breath in, reach up. Next breath out, close down. Inhale, open. Exhale, close. Once more. Inhale, open. Exhale, close. Inhale, reach forward. Exhale, come over to your right. Inhale, open your right arm up. Exhale, close it down. Inhale, draw open. Exhale, close down. I just like the feeling of running my fingers along my chest there, but you could also swing your arm wide. Inhale, hands forward. Exhale, dive to a light forward fold. Inhale, bend your knees any amount. You could come deep down into a squat. Exhale, fold. One more time. Inhale here. Exhale, fold. Let's inhale, start the bend in the knees, and we'll exhale. Come all the way up, roll your shoulders down your back, shake things out. Now, for those of you who have your cameras on, I'm gonna come closer and I'm gonna call it out for you so you can feel it. And I can see if my cues are landing. And if you wanna turn it on, I'd love that, but we're fine as is, thank you. Okay, so we're starting with a little shakeout. Find the flow of your breath. And next time you breathe in, lift your arms up, catch your right wrist, exhale, lean to your left. Inhale through center, exhale, lean to your right. Do 2 more of those. Inhales, lift, exhales, lower. Good, inhale, lift, exhale, lower. 1 more set, in and up, out and down, in to lift, out to lean. Good, inhale, release your hands, exhale, row them in. Good. Inhale, reach. Exhale, pull. And once more with a pull. Good. Now the reverse backstroke. In and out. Good. 2 more. Inhales, lift. Exhales, lower and your hips come down. Inhale, hands together. Exhale, chop to one side. Inhale through center. Exhale, chop to the other side. Good. Do 2 more sets like that. Inhales come through center and exhales help you with the twisting movement. Remember to make this spicier. Your hips and your knees are staying in line with each other. Good. When you come back to the first side, you can stay. Next breath in, you'll lift your arm up toward the ceiling. And exhale, take your hand down. Twice more like that. Inhales, lift. And exhales, lower. Looks good, y'all. Inhale, lift. Exhale, lower. Then inhale, come through center. And do the other side. Inhale, unfurl your arm up, and exhale, hands together. This goes on the flow of your breath. You don't need to match my cueing. Obviously, I'm always exhaling when I'm talking. Then inhale, hands forward. Exhale, bow forward in whatever degree of forward fold feels good. Inhale, bend your knees, drop your hips, look forward, squat any amount. Exhale, fold. And do another set like that. Inhale, look up. Exhale, bow. Inhale, start your trip up. And exhale to arrive back at standing. Good. Are you ready to row? Do you feel a little bit warmer? I hope so. Does anybody have any questions for me? You can either unmute or pop them in the chat before we do this again as a stretching experience. Well, I'll take that as a no. But if you have them, put them in and we can talk about it on the other end of our stretch. So let's go through and see how we might work out any kinks as we come off the water using that same template for the sequence. So join me again in an inhalation to raise your arms and an exhalation to lean over. And as you stay leaned over, you'll feel the stretch come down the right side. Stay here and breathe. I'll come a little closer to the camera so you can see a few options here for this stretch. One is to let your right shoulder come up towards your ear. I know you've probably been in yoga class where the teacher's like, move your shoulder blade down, but how are you ever going to get a good stretch for your lats if they're always engaged? So if you tug on your arm and let your shoulder come up, kind of like you're holding your phone between your shoulder and your ear, you might feel that wonderfully down the back right side here. You might roll your right shoulder forward and tug even more. It's kind of ugly, but it might feel good. Now, if it doesn't feel good, don't do it. That's the way to get more down the back. If you want to get more into your pecs, stay leaned over in this direction, hug your belly in a little, keep your low back long, but roll your elbow back. And now you've got a stretch that goes through your pecs and your underarm, and you can breathe there. One more variation I love is to bend the elbow and wrap fingertips to the side of the head. That way my neck doesn't have to do much work. And I feel like that gives a really good anchor for a lats stretch. If you had a shoulder injury and that didn't feel good, you could do the whole thing with your hand on your opposite shoulder. You'll get the spinal flexion and the stretch through your obliques and intercostals. Let's come through center. Take a moment to notice what you just did, how that feels between the two sides. And then we'll come to the other side. And you can take any variations that taste good. That might mean rolling your shoulder forward and tugging. That might mean rolling your shoulder back. Maybe it feels nice to go between the two poles. And in time, you might bend your elbow more. Another way to put some weight into it is to pull down on a bent elbow or let your hand hold your head. If your left shoulder didn't like this, palm to your right shoulder would be a fine choice. So that's a way to work around the shoulders and the outer lines of the torso. Now let's get into the front of the torso. So remember, we did some rows, but then we did these reverse back strokes. So let's lift up and take your hands back. Flip your palms toward the ceiling, point your thumbs back, your pinkies forward, like you're gonna kind of low five somebody next to you like that. And if it feels nice for your back, you could lift your chin and your gaze some and just let the movement of your fingernails back behind you feed a stretch up your biceps, through your chest, and down the other arm. That's a fine way to stretch through your chest. Another is to take your hands to your hips, loop your shoulders down, squeeze your elbows together, do the same puff up with your chest. And yet another is to take your fingers together, interlace them, either press them down or stretch them low. This would be a great place to either hold like an oar or a dog leash if you've got one, or a yoga strap or like a hand towel, and stretch from there. And you can do that with an overhand grip or an underhand grip. That's going to change the sensation in your shoulder. So that would all be really good stuff. You can kind of do a flossing movement, all that a great way to stretch through your chest. Now, we came next into the little sit down and the chop. I'm gonna back up so you can see ways that you might twist over and stay twisted. I said we wanted to stretch into the hip flexors. So while you're twisted to your left, say, you could step your right foot back some. Oh, I already feel that in the front of the hip. You could stay up high here, like hand to your thigh, hand to your hip, or palms together. Or if you had more space, you could come down and do a prayer twist. This might not work for everybody. So let me show you another way to do it. Hand underneath your shoulder to the floor, and then you can press your hand to your thigh, so you're twisting toward the belly. You're twisting the belly toward the bent leg. You could raise your arm up. You could play with bending your back leg knee, even taking it down to the floor, which will get you deeper into the front of the hip. You could even look for a quad stretch or loop your dog leash or your hand towel around the back foot. That's one you might want to hold for a little while. Take your time if you're enjoying it, and then switch sides. I'm going to come and take a little peek at you. Awesome. Now, depending on what kind of rowing you do, you might find there's a huge difference in this twist when you do it one way versus the other way. And I said the part of the beauty of doing a home practice is that you can do what you need to find balance. So here's where you might hold on the tight side 2 or 3 times longer than you would hold on the not so tight side. Go ahead, take your time moving through on the second side. If this is just getting good for you, stay where you are, because we're moving to something symmetrical next. After we did the chopping, we came into the forward fold and the squat. Let me show you some ways to develop your forward fold that might feel good. One is to bend your knees so much that your belly is in contact with your thighs. Here I go down to do that. Your arms can dangle down. Another is to straighten one leg and bump your hip to the opposite side. That gets you more into your outer hip. And yet another is to straighten both legs. If you wanted to add more traction to your spine, you could tuck your hands into your elbows, and that will feed more weight into your forward fold. Or you could take your hands behind your head, which will get you another lat stretch and a tricep stretch and put more weight into your forward fold as well. Good. Yet another thing to do, again, if you had like the towel or the strap, would be to hold it behind your back as you go into the forward fold. So you're also getting a chest stretch at the same time. Sidebar, if you feel, and may I present to you my butt here on Zoom, if you feel a stretch, I'm putting air quotes because it's not the kind of stretch we want to feel. If you feel tension way high up to your sitting bone, I ask you to bend your knees a whole lot, because that's where the hamstring tendon can be kind of vulnerable to injury. And sometimes I have athletes say, hey, can you show me a stretch to do to get up here in this high part of my hamstrings? And the answer is, no, we don't want to stretch that. That's less contractile tissue and it's less vascular tissue. And if you get a little tear there, it can be a real bummer and years to heal. So you want to feel the stretch in your hamstrings in the center of the muscle, not toward the back of the knee and not toward the sitting bone. One more thing to show you, the squat. And hopefully the camera will catch me back here. Let's squat. There are a couple ways to squat. One is to have your knees and toes facing forward and your elbows framing your knees. This is a way to get a nice calf stretch, pretty decent quad stretch and glute stretch. The other way to squat is to come wide, where your knees are wider than your elbows and knees and toes turn out to the side. In yoga, we call this malasana, or you might know it as yoga squat or yogi's squat. From a squat, you could fold forward, drape your spine forward. That's a way to stretch into your back, or you can keep your back muscles engaged and prop up. You can also twist from a squat or rock side to side in a squat, all of which are really nice for your spine and your lower legs. Finally, after your squat, you've gotten almost the entire chain of your body through a nice stretch out. You might want to put in a child's pose where you're resting on the tops of your feet or with your toes curled under. So you're stretching through your feet and the tibialis muscle, the front of your shin, just pulling some when you're in the boat. So that is a sequence that you'll find in the recording here and the slides. And if you want just those 2 slides written up for you, send me a message and I will send them to you on email. info@sageroundtree.com is me. I am here to answer any questions you have. I'd love to know how that felt.
I have a quick question to kick it off, if you'd like, Sage. When I was doing the overhand, this bit, I tend to experience it right in my hip area and it grabs. And I'm wondering what I might do to help sort of loosen that up, or
show me the movement that brings that on again.
When I'm just simply doing a lateral stretch. I experience it only.
Yeah. It feels a little sticky there, like there might be People say, oh, there might be a fascial adhesion there. Well, there could be, or there could be who knows what there. I would not be too aggressive with it, because you can still probably find a stretch by going not quite so far. And I would maybe ask a manual therapist about that. Like next time you, the world resumes and you are on the massage table, ask them if they can feel something there that would explain that.
Yeah, sounds good.
Because yeah, it's kind of tough to tell over Zoom. Yeah, but the general rule that we can extrapolate from the question, which is a great question, is like, if it doesn't feel good, don't do it.
Right.
And if it feels kind of interesting to explore it a little, and then see how it feels over the next day. And then maybe you can explore it a little deeper the next time.
Right. That's cool.
Part of yoga's beauty for us, for everything, not just as athletes, but as people with bodies, is it gives us a chance to really tune into the sensation in our bodies and to think, is that a pleasant sensation? Is that an unpleasant sensation? Is this intensity, or is this deleterious pain? And that's something that athletes can get their meter skewed about. Like they just think everything is fine. It's just intensity. It's not pain. And then some other people can think everything is pain when it's just intensity. So yoga is a great opportunity to think, what is that feeling in the back of my hip, and what makes it worse? What makes it feel better?
Nice. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions or comments, or how you felt doing that?
That was
Can
wonderful.
I say something? Oh, thank you, Nicole. I have made it, what is today, March 3rd. I have made it to this point, including almost 360 days of people teaching yoga on Zoom. That's the first live yoga I taught on Zoom. We did not make a pivot to video. I do a lot of video, but I do asynchronous video. So I've been in front of the camera a lot this year, but always just like me and the camera, or the camera operator, and not people on the other end. That's an experience. Thank you for playing along. Thanks for sharing the video. I understand why people would not want to share the video too. That is quite something. Not sure what I think of it, but it was fun to have you guys playing along.
I have a question for you.
Great.
Since I love that you have this focus of yoga for athletes, and then I've been on that side, and I've been on the extreme other side of like more like yin style.
Right.
And I find that especially when I'm working with people who are more athletic, they're always working towards like the end of the stretch. And it's sometimes difficult to explain, like you're stretching the entire time, even when maybe you don't feel that you're still stretching. Do you have any, phrases you use with athletes to maybe keep them from going all the way to the extreme all the time?
Absolutely. And often it would depend on what the sport is, but you could think of it as doing like a longer time trial. Is that you need to start at an intensity that doesn't feel that strong for the first minute, especially if you're doing yin, which for those of you who don't know is a longer hold of a pose, somewhere between 2 and 5 minutes of like a deep stretch down on the floor, like that twisting lunge that we experimented with might be held in a yin class for like 5 minutes. And you don't want to go to your endpoint at the beginning, or how are you ever going to get any deeper? So you need to start at an intensity that you can keep going, and trust that time is going to increase the sensation as you go. It's on one of these slides, but one of the principles of exercise physiology is that we apply progressive overload to the body, right? So we need to get the right level of stress so that the body says, oh, that's something I might want to handle in the future. And if we're always not progressively overloading, but just straight up overloading the body, it's never going to grow. It's just going to shut down. So we need to think, how can I tweak those variables of frequency, intensity, and duration so that I'm achieving the right kind of stress for my body? And if we can start it at what feels like it's too easy and recognize this is going to be a 5-minute experience, then we can tweak it as we go, instead of ending at the beginning. I mean, you might sprint at the end of your race, but you're not going to open, well, All right, so yeah, you might open in a sprint too, but you're not going to maintain that the whole time. That's what makes it a sprint, is that it is at the very upper end of the spectrum. Another thing that back in my gym days, we used to use the RPE scale, rating of perceived exertion, 1 to 10. And you cannot start it at 10. You need to start your hold at maybe a 3 or a 4. And then if it feels like, my body is bored here, I've lost the sensation, my mind is wandering, then you can ratchet it up to a 5 or a 6, but you don't want to just go straight for it. Another thing I might say, Nicole, is if you are too aggressive at the start of a stretch, your body's going to say, hell no, stop. And you're going to wind up shutting down, like the muscle fibers will just go, no, not going to do it. So you need to give them space to loosen up, to lighten up. You have to kind of woo them and not just come in hot and heavy at the beginning. That's something that athletes might respond to as well.
So unless anybody else has another question, I'll chime in again. I was told by, I will name no names, but an international known running coach that he just did not recommend yoga. He liked it for the mental benefits, but for the actual stretching, and he didn't like it because he figured people were training and strengthening and getting their muscles tight, and they want them tight, for the activity that they're doing. I know you addressed this in the teaching yoga to athletes, but I was curious if you could sort of talk about that a little bit.
Right, there's certainly an element of truth to that attitude, because we're training to get our bodies for a particular sport into a particular physical condition. And especially for running, there has got to be stiffness, because otherwise you'd be running kind of like this and you'd be floppy and you'd be losing a bunch of kinetic energy to the ground, that instead you want to be stiff and springy and used for forward propulsion. That said, I have yet to see in 17 years of teaching yoga to athletes, somebody who is that far at the end of the spectrum, like lose any of their stiffness in yoga class. It physically, I haven't noticed it happen. What you might see though, is that somebody who's really got a foot in both camps, who's both an athlete and maybe a yoga teacher or an experienced practitioner who really loves it, is that you can't have both things at once. You can't both have your maximum like sport specific strength and stiffness and your yoga journal cover kind of pose where you got your foot behind your head, right? You can certainly have all those things in the course of a lifetime or maybe even a year or two, but you're not going to get your PR at the same time as you're doing 2 or 3 hours of intense physical flexibility, kind of showcase pose focused yoga asana every day. So I think that is an argument that can be made, but I think that in the real world, it just doesn't happen. And another problem that we have when we're talking to lay people about yoga is that they think all yoga is whatever kind of yoga that they had experience with. Maybe that one time that their mom made them go to the Y back in the 70s and do yoga. And what the menu of yoga that's on the buffet right now is so vast. From a yin yoga class to a restorative yoga class to 105-degree flow class to Inferno Pilates to whatever, it can be anywhere along the spectrum. And I know that's a problem that happens in the general population is you've got back pain, you go to the doctor says, oh, try yoga. And if you went to gentle yoga or yoga for back pain, you might be in just the right place. But if you went to the 105-degree class, you might really have a very negative experience and consequently never want to try any more yoga. So I take the point, but I also don't think it's a real world problem to have, especially in the upper levels of sports competition. There's so much time focused on the training itself that there wouldn't be time to do enough yoga to start to erase your gains. Right. Particularly, I work with several of the teams at UNC, and those kids are so overscheduled. Like there's no possible way that I could, incite them to overstretch or to make themselves floppy in a way that would affect their performance at all. They come to yoga for the mellow. They want to stretch. They come in and they'll flop down on the floor and say, can we just do breath exercises? Can we just do shavasana? And they're so tired. I once had a football player fall asleep in a yoga pose. And it wasn't shavasana. It was like a forward fold, and he was flat out asleep. So like, he's not going to overdo it. There's just like, I have 20 minutes with them or 30 minutes with them once a week. And I don't think he's doing any more of this on his own. So hypothetically, yes. Realistically, no.
Okay. And out of curiosity, this is a slightly separate topic, but do you have a different philosophy or perspective when you're teaching youth versus when you're teaching? So if you're teaching, say, teenage youth through early 20s, and I'm thinking of a juniors coach, or the difference between coaching juniors and coaching masters in terms of integrating that.
Yeah. I always feel kind of out of my water, out of my element in teaching younger people. But I think that's just me. Even though I've parented 2 teenagers, I always feel judged and put on the spot. And so just know that that's going to color my answer. I feel like when I'm working with the younger populations, which I do, that unless they are very serious, and I have taught like a class, yoga for young athletes, where they were super serious, you know, like top tier tennis players, like they were too serious. That was just like working with an adult. There was no difference. And these kids like had specialized really early in their sports. And so teaching those kids is a lot like teaching an adult population. And I'm sure that's the case for the juniors rowers as well. They're like super serious. But what I found in more like kind of gym class settings or like club running group settings is that I need to pick up the pace so I can keep the kids engaged. Otherwise, they start to poke each other and tell fart jokes and say, I see your butt up and downward facing dog, which I get it, like that's the age that they are, but that's what I was like, what? So when I'm prepping a class for younger people like that, I do more flow, more movement, just to keep their attention. That said, I'm usually pleasantly surprised at how they really like to say namaste. They really like to chant. They really like all the things that I thought they would make fun of. I don't know if that gives much of an answer, but at the higher levels of competition, the athletes they need to relax the same way that a master's athlete would need to relax. And so the class winds up being extremely similar.
Right. Nice. Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Anything else?
If y'all have questions that arise after the fact, just email me and I'm happy to have a conversation.
Well, I'm curious just what inspired you to focus on yoga for athletes. I mean, I'm assuming it's because you're athletic and but I was just curious what got you into
that. I got serious about yoga at the same time as I was training for my first marathon. I came up just as a couch potato. I was not athletic. I was on the swim team in high school for 1 year. But I came to running as stress relief when I was in graduate school, and it made me tight. And so I thought, oh, yoga might help. And I hated yoga. When I went to it, to be honest, I thought it was too hard. It was really freaky. It was humbling, if not humiliating, because it was so tough. To the point where I like had a taste of it and I was like, that's not for me. But when I was pregnant with my older daughter, I went to prenatal yoga, and prenatal yoga is a party. It's there's a huge sense of community. It's a lot more mellow over practice. So that's where I started to see like, oh, yoga's great. And when she was a baby, I was training for marathon, and things started to tighten up, and I was either out running or I was spending a lot of time like holding her. So I started to go to yoga at that point, and I saw it as a really nice compliment. So it was, of course, it was personal. It's like, it made a huge difference especially in that first marathon. It wasn't that I was like busting into a tree pose at mile 20, but it was that I could keep my act together as things got progressively more intense mile by mile. And I was like, oh, like this is about breath. This is about focus. And this is about those poses that I didn't like and wanted to leave. So there I got interested in it, and it grew from there.
Nice. Cool.
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say I really appreciate that you are bringing the yoga and fitness together, because
Thanks.
they are so separate in my world for various reasons that I've always had a hard time finding that middle ground. And I don't think I even realized that I put so much of the information you shared in a fitness box in my brain. And I never accessed it in yoga. And I'm like, oh yeah, I know that stuff. I should be using it.
Yeah, sometimes I say in the course that Jessica's been doing, I say like yoga asana is exercise, and as such is subject to the rules of exercise physiology. So if you're thinking like, if you want to achieve any kind of outcome on the yoga mat, like you want to get into a handstand, you can't just try to start with a handstand. You have to build up the constituent parts. You have to play with frequency, intensity, and duration. You need to give yourself rest between goes at it. I mean, it is just ways to use your body. There's a lot more similarity. Yeah, that it does tend to get siloed because gym stuff happens at the gym, although now yoga classes do happen at the gym, but yoga stuff happens at the yoga studio.
So I have one last question if no one else wants to chime in. I was curious if you had sort of a checklist, if you may, for when you're actually doing your first maybe 1 or 2 yoga classes for athletes that may not be familiar with yoga, and certain things that you just sort of make sure that you communicate beginning, during, after the class to sort of, you know, make sure that it's safe and comfortable and, you know, works for.
Yeah, I would say, well, nothing should hurt. You know, it should all feel like it's at like maybe no more than a 7 out of 10 intensity. You can leave at any point. You know, this is it, yeah, it's not forced compliance. You can leave the pose at any point. You're not born knowing how to do some of these things, so don't expect to nail them right off the top. Often I say, like, if we went out on a golf course and I handed you a driver and said, hit the ball, you might not even hit the ball the first time. So why would you expect to like pop up into crow pose all of a sudden? It just doesn't work that way. Your body is in a particular condition because of your sports training. And in fact, the tightnesses that you encounter are probably things that you should be proud of because it means that you're well toned in those areas. Don't compete with each other. That's where sometimes it's nice though, that a little bit of competition can be good if you go to work with a team. You can kind of harness that. You can do partner stuff and have a good time with that. Yeah, and the comfort with comfort and comfort with discomfort discussion, I think, is really useful. So it's that we have to have a different mentality for this yoga stuff than we do when we get into the boat or when we go into the weight room. It's a very different mental attitude. And the more you can let go here, the harder you'll be able to work when you're back in the work situation. It's good to have that range, that real reserve of like, I can hit the high notes, but I can also hit the low notes. So it's a chance to practice a different mode of being, and in ways that will ultimately make you a nicer person and therefore benefit the entire world.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, any last questions here? And if not, you do have Sage's contact information to follow up with her on stuff. But yeah. Anybody else want to chime in or? Okay. Well, any last words that you'd like to share, Sage? Or?
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I appreciate your time, and this is fun for me.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It's
my pleasure.
Lovely as always. I really appreciate you presenting your information tonight. Cool. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a good evening, and we'll see you soon.